The Memphis sun was setting when Johnny Cash pulled into that gas station. Nobody knew that in the next 12 minutes, a complete stranger would say something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. It was 1,971. Cash was at the peak of his career, sold-out shows, chart-topping records, the whole world knowing his name. But that evening, driving alone back from a recording session, something felt hollow. The kind of emptiness that fame couldn't fill, that applause couldn't touch. He parked at Pump 7, a small, worn-down station on the outskirts of town. The kind of place where nobody expected to see Johnny Cash. But someone recognized him. An older man, maybe 65, with oil-stained hands and a weathered face, was pumping gas 2 lanes over. Their eyes met for a brief second. Cash nodded, the polite acknowledgement of a stranger. Nothing more. Then the man walked over. "Mr. Cash," the man said quietly, his voice shaking just slightly. "I don't mean to bother you." Cash had heard this opening line 1,000 times. Fans wanting autographs, stories, a moment of his time. He was tired, emotionally drained, but something in the man's eyes stopped him from brushing it off. "You're not bothering me," Cash said, though part of him wasn't sure that was true. The man hesitated. Then he spoke words that would crack something open inside Johnny Cash. I wanted to thank you," the man said. "You saved my son's life." Cash froze. He'd never met this man before. Never met his son. His mind raced through memories, concerts, faces in crowds, nothing. "I'm sorry," Cash said slowly. "I don't think You don't remember," the man interrupted gently. "You wouldn't. It was 4 years ago. Folsom Prison." Now Cash's heart started pounding. The man continued, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "My boy was in that prison. 23 years old. Stupid mistake. Armed robbery. He was drowning in there, Mr. Cash. Drowning in shame, in anger, in the belief that he was nothing but trash." Cash felt his throat tighten. He knew that feeling, that shame, that sense of being beyond redemption. "He wrote me a letter after your concert," the man said, pulling a folded, worn piece of paper from his shirt pocket. "He said when you walked onto that stage, you didn't look at them like they were criminals. You looked at them like they were human beings." The man's hands were trembling now. "He said you told them, 'I've been where you are. I know what it's like to be broken. But you're not your worst moment. You're not your biggest mistake.'" Cash's eyes stung. He didn't remember saying those exact words, but he remembered the feeling. Standing in that prison cafeteria, looking into the eyes of men the world had given up on. Seeing himself reflected back. "My son got out 2 years ago," the man continued, his voice cracking. "He's been clean ever since. He works with me now, has a little girl on the way. And he says it started that day, when a man he'd only seen on TV looked at him like he mattered." The gas pump clicked behind them. Neither man moved. Cash felt something break inside him. Not a painful break, a necessary one. Like ice cracking on a frozen lake, letting water flow again. All the emptiness he'd been feeling moments ago, all the exhaustion, the sense of going through the motions suddenly made sense. Because here was a man, a complete stranger, at a gas station, telling him that a moment he barely remembered had changed the entire trajectory of another human being's life. "What's your son's name?" Cash asked quietly. "Daniel," the man said. "Daniel Wright." Cash reached into his jacket and pulled out a small notebook, the one he always carried for song lyrics and scattered thoughts. He wrote something down, tore out the page, and handed it to the man. "Give this to Daniel," Cash said. The man looked down at the paper. In Cash's handwriting, it read, "Daniel, your father just reminded me why I do what I do. You're not your past. You're your future. Keep walking. Johnny Cash." The man's eyes filled with tears. He looked up at Cash, unable to speak. "Tell him," Cash said, his own voice thick now. "Tell him that I've been fighting my own demons for years. Pills, alcohol, pride, shame. Tell him that some days I still feel like I'm drowning. But meeting your father tonight, knowing that Daniel is out there, walking free, building a life that gives me hope too." This was the moment everything shifted. Because what Johnny Cash realized, standing in that gas station parking lot as the sky turned purple, was that his shame, his addiction, his failures, his darkest moments wasn't just his burden to carry. It was his bridge to others. His way of saying, "I see you. I've been there. You're not alone." The man reached out and shook Cash's hand, holding it for a long moment. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for seeing him." "Thank you," Cash replied, "for reminding me that being seen matters." The man walked back to his truck. Cash watched him drive away. He stood there for several minutes, not moving, just breathing. The attendant inside the station had been watching through the window, probably wondering why Johnny Cash was just standing there, staring at nothing. But Cash wasn't staring at nothing. He was staring at everything. He thought about all the times he'd felt like a fraud, standing on stages, singing about redemption while battling his own addiction, talking about faith while wrestling with doubt, preaching about compassion while judging himself mercilessly. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the message wasn't, "I've figured it all out." Maybe the message was, "I'm still figuring it out, and so are you. And that's okay." Cash got back in his car. He didn't start the engine right away. Instead, he sat there, hands on the steering wheel, and he prayed. Not the formal kind of prayer, just words from a broken man to whatever was listening. "Help me remember," he whispered. "Help me remember that it matters. That showing up matters. That being honest about my mess matters. That looking people in the eye and saying you're not alone matters." He drove home differently that night. Not faster, not slower, just different. Like a man who'd been reminded of his purpose. When he walked through the door, June Carter was in the kitchen. She took one look at his face and knew something had happened. "What is it?" she asked softly. Cash told her about the man, about Daniel, about the letter, about standing in that parking lot feeling like maybe, just maybe, all the pain he'd been through wasn't wasted. June walked over and put her hand on his chest, right over his heart. "You've always known this," she said gently. "You've always known that your wounds are your credentials, that your brokenness is your bridge. Sometimes you just need a stranger at a gas station to remind you." That night, Cash couldn't sleep. He went downstairs to his study, picked up his guitar, and started writing. The words came slowly at first, then faster, pouring out like something that had been dammed up for too long. He wrote about shame, about the weight of carrying secrets, about the terror of being seen for who you really are, flawed, addicted, struggling, and the miracle of being loved anyway. He wrote about the men at Folsom, about Daniel Wright, whom he'd never met but who'd changed his life tonight through his father's words, about every person who'd ever felt like their past disqualified them from their future. And he wrote about hope. Not the cheap kind, not the everything will be fine kind, but the real kind. The kind that says it's hard and it hurts, and you might stumble, but you keep walking anyway. The song would never be recorded. It would stay in that notebook, unfinished, like so many of Cash's private thoughts. But writing it changed something in him, solidified something that the encounter at the gas station had cracked open. 3 weeks later, Cash got a letter. It was from Daniel Wright. The man from the gas station had given him Cash's note and told him about their encounter. Daniel wrote about his time in prison, about hearing Cash perform that day, about the slow, painful process of rebuilding his life. But what struck Cash most was the last paragraph. Mr. Cash, my father told me what you said to him, that knowing about me gives you hope too. I never thought about it that way. I always thought famous people like you had it all figured out. Knowing that you're still fighting, that you still struggle, that you still need hope, it makes me feel less alone. It makes me feel like if Johnny Cash can keep walking, maybe I can too. Cash pinned that letter to the wall in his study. It stayed there for years. Every time he felt like giving up, like the addiction was too strong or the shame too heavy, he'd look at that letter. He'd remember Daniel. He'd remember the man at Pump 7. He'd remember that his struggle wasn't just his own, it was part of something bigger. A web of shared humanity. A network of broken people, keeping each other upright. A chorus of voices saying, "Me too. I'm still here. Keep going." Years later, in an interview, someone asked Cash about his legacy. He didn't talk about his hit songs or his awards or his place in music history. Instead, he told a version of this story about a gas station, about a father and a son, about the power of being seen. "I think we're all just stumbling around," Cash said, "trying to figure out how to be human. The best we can do is be honest about the stumbling, be honest about the falling, and then reach out a hand to help someone else up. Because chances are somebody helped us up once too," the interviewer asked. "Is that what compassion means to you?" Cash was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Compassion means remembering that the person in front of you is fighting a battle you know nothing about. It means looking past the surface, past the success or the failure, the good reputation or the bad one, and seeing the human being underneath, scared, hopeful, trying their best. Just like you." "And what about shame?" the interviewer pressed. "You've talked about carrying shame for years. How did you move past it?" Cash smiled, but it was a sad smile, knowing, "I don't know if you ever fully moved past it," he said honestly. "I think you just learned to carry it differently. You stop letting it define you. You stop believing that your worst moment is your only moment. And you start understanding that maybe, just maybe, your pain has a purpose, that your wounds can heal someone else, that your story can give someone else permission to keep writing theirs." The gas station is still there. Pump 7 still works. The station changed owners twice, got a new paint job, added a small convenience store. But it's still there, on the outskirts of Memphis, where ordinary people stop to fill up their tanks and buy coffee and go about their lives. They don't know what happened there in 1971. They don't know about the man with oil-stained hands or his son Daniel or the letter that hung on Johnny Cash's wall for decades. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the most important moments of our lives happen in the most ordinary places, at gas stations and grocery stores and street corners, in brief conversations with strangers, in small acts of recognition and vulnerability and hope. Maybe compassion isn't a grand gesture. Maybe it's just looking at someone and saying, with your eyes or your words or your presence, "I see you. You matter. Keep going." And maybe healing doesn't happen in one dramatic moment. Maybe it happens slowly, gradually, in the accumulation of small encounters that remind us we're not alone, that our shame doesn't have the final word, that our past doesn't determine our future, that we're allowed to stumble and still be worthy of love. Johnny Cash carried that encounter with him until the day he died. In his final years, when his health was failing and the world was preparing to say goodbye, he thought often about that evening, about the man at Pump 7, about Daniel Wright, about all the people whose lives had touched his in ways he'd never fully understand. And he hoped, truly hoped, that somewhere out there, Daniel was still walking, still building his life, still choosing, every day, to believe that his story wasn't over, because that's what hope is in the end. Not the certainty that everything will be okay, but the decision to keep going anyway, to keep showing up, to keep reaching out, to keep believing that our presence matters, Our compassion matters. Our willingness to be vulnerable and honest and human matters. Johnny Cash learned that at a gas station in Memphis, from a stranger whose name he wrote in a notebook on an evening when he was feeling empty and found himself filled. And the most beautiful part? That stranger never knew the full impact of that conversation. He never knew that Johnny Cash went home and wrote a song, that he prayed differently, that he carried the encounter with him for decades, that he told the story in interviews, trying to articulate what it meant. He just knew that he thanked a man who had seen his son as human. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes just showing up and speaking the truth and acknowledging someone's pain and celebrating their healing is enough. Sometimes being human to another human is all the legacy we need. I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. But people will never forget how you made them feel. Johnny Cash never actually said this quote, but he lived it at Pump 7 on a Memphis evening in 1971 when a stranger reminded him why his brokenness mattered. If this story moved you, take a moment to think of someone around you can simply see, acknowledge, or tell you are not alone. And if you want to hear more real stories that inspire, don't forget to subscribe, because every person's story has the power to change another life.